August 14, 1943. Rabaul, New Britain. The radio operator's hand froze mid-transcription. Through the crackling static of Japanese Imperial Navy communications, the message repeated 3 times in urgent succession, Dainana Sentai, Zenmetsu. 7th Squadron, annihilated. Commander Takashi Yamamoto stood in the humid operations room of the Southeast Area Fleet Headquarters, watching his intelligence officer's face drain of color. Outside, palm fronds scraped against corrugated metal in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside, the teletype machine chattered like mechanical insects, spitting out coded casualty reports that shouldn't exist. "How many?" Yamamoto asked. 18 dive bombers. 7 fighters. All confirmed destroyed. The officer's voice cracked. "Sir, that's the 3rd Squadron in 2 weeks." Yamamoto walked to the tactical map dominating the southern wall. Red pins marked Japanese positions across New Guinea, the Solomons, and the Bismarck Archipelago. Blue pins, American forces, clustered around Port Moresby and Guadalcanal. Between them, a vast expanse of ocean and jungle where the war's momentum was shifting. But something else shifted too. Something impossible to map. What did the pilots report before going silent? Yamamoto's jaw tightened. The intelligence officer consulted his notes, hand trembling. They engaged what they believed to be a squadron of 12 B-17 flying fortresses at 18,000 feet. Standard formation. Standard escort. They pressed the attack according to doctrine. And the B-17s turned into them. Aggressively. The formation broke apart into individual aircraft executing fighter maneuvers. He looked up, confusion and fear mixing in his expression. "Sir, heavy bombers don't fly like that." "They can't." Yamamoto said nothing. He'd heard similar reports before. Bombers that fought like fighters. American aircraft appearing in impossible numbers. Entire squadrons materializing where reconnaissance had confirmed empty skies hours earlier. The morning sun began bleeding through the eastern windows, casting long shadows across the map. In that light, the blue pins seemed to multiply. "Assemble the squadron commanders," Yamamoto ordered quietly. "Something's wrong, but no one knows what." By August 1943, the Pacific War had become a brutal mathematics problem written in blood and aviation fuel. The Japanese Empire controlled nearly 3 million square miles of conquered territory, from the Burmese border to the Central Pacific atolls. Defending this vast perimeter required thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of pilots, and a logistical miracle that was quietly failing. American industrial capacity was producing aircraft at rates that defied belief, 8,000 planes per month by mid-1943. But production wasn't the problem. Deployment was. Getting combat-ready aircraft from California to forward bases in New Guinea or the Solomons required a supply chain spanning 7,000 miles of ocean. Each B-17 heavy bomber needed to be disassembled, crated, shipped across the Pacific, reassembled, tested, armed, and crewed. The process took weeks, sometimes months. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders adapted. Imperial Navy doctrine emphasized aggressive interception, swarm American bomber formations with superior numbers of nimble Zero fighters, accept casualties, destroy the heavy bombers before they could reach their targets. The mathematics worked. American bomber losses in the Southwest Pacific averaged 4 to 6% per mission in early 1943. Unsustainable. But by August, something changed. Japanese combat reports began describing encounters that violated every known pattern. A squadron of B-17s reported over WWII would be engaged and destroyed by Japanese interceptors. 2 hours later, the same squadron, or what appeared to be the same squadron, would strike a different target 200 miles away. American bomber strength seemed inexhaustible. Imperial headquarters in Tokyo dismissed early reports as pilot error or exaggeration. Americans couldn't possibly be producing and deploying heavy bombers that quickly. The logistics were impossible. Yet the losses mounted. Japanese fighter squadrons, veteran units with years of combat experience, were being ground down at accelerating rates. Pilots reported engaging 2, 3, sometimes 4 separate American heavy bomber formations in a single day. They shot down bombers that should have been alone in the sky. They expended ammunition on targets that kept reappearing. "We are fighting ghosts," one squadron commander wrote in his personal diary. "The Americans have learned to resurrect their aircraft." The truth was worse than ghosts. The truth was a supply sergeant with a theater background and a criminal level of disregard for regulations. By September 1943, the Pacific War wasn't just a contest of production capacity or pilot skill. It had become a psychological campaign, and the Americans were winning by making the Japanese see things that weren't there. Intelligence estimates in Tokyo put American heavy bomber strength in the Southwest Pacific at approximately 150 to 200 aircraft. The actual number was closer to 80. The Japanese were burning through pilots and ammunition, fighting an enemy force that was twice as large in their perception as it was in reality. A miracle wasn't needed. A rebel was already at work. Staff Sergeant John "Jack" Walker was never supposed to be in a war. Born in Burbank, California, in 1918, Walker grew up in the shadow of Lockheed's aircraft factory, where his father worked as a sheet metal fabricator. While other boys played baseball, young Jack spent afternoons in the local community theater, learning stagecraft, lighting design, and the art of creating illusions on a budget. He studied set design at Pasadena City College for 2 years before money ran out. By 1940, he was working at Warner Brothers as an assistant props master, building fake buildings for cowboy movies and painting cardboard rocks to look like granite. When Pearl Harbor happened, Walker enlisted immediately. The Army Air Corps looked at his resume, theater, not engineering, and assigned him to the 43rd Bombardment Group as a supply sergeant. Someone had to manage inventory. By June 1943, he was stationed at WWII Airfield, New Guinea. A muddy strip carved from jungle, lined with palm log revetments and canvas tents that turned into ovens by mid-morning. His job was simple: track supplies, requisition parts, keep records. Walker hated it. He watched bomber crews climb into their aircraft each morning, knowing many wouldn't return. He inventoried the personal effects of dead airmen. He saw commanders making impossible choices: cancel a critical mission or send undermanned squadrons into overwhelming enemy fire. The American bomber force was spread thin. Maintenance issues, combat losses, and the tyranny of distance meant that on any given day, only about half the assigned aircraft were mission-ready. Crews flew multiple sorties per week, exhausted and increasingly fatalistic. One afternoon in late July, Walker stood watching a B-17 taxi for takeoff. The bomber's waist gunner had painted a name on the fuselage: Ghost Town Kid. Walker smiled grimly. The whole damn squadron was becoming ghosts. That night, he couldn't sleep. The humid air pressed down like a wet blanket. In the darkness, he thought about illusions. About how theater audiences believed what they were shown, not what was real. An idea formed. Dangerous. Probably illegal. Definitely unauthorized. If they can't tell the difference, he whispered to himself, why waste real bombers? 2 weeks later, he started building fake airplanes. Walker's realization came from watching Japanese reconnaissance aircraft. Every 3 days, like clockwork, a lone Mitsubishi Ki-46 Dyna would appear at 28,000 feet, far above the range of most anti-aircraft fire. The Japanese photo-reconnaissance plane would orbit for 30 minutes, cameras clicking, then disappear back toward WWII or Rabaul. The Americans couldn't stop them. By the time fighters scrambled to intercept, the Dyna was gone. But Walker understood something the intelligence officers didn't. The Japanese were counting. They weren't just mapping defenses or tracking damage. They were conducting inventory. How many bombers were parked in revetments? How many fighters? What was the actual American strength? Those photographs went to Imperial headquarters. They became the basis for tactical decisions. If Japanese reconnaissance showed 15 B-17s at WWII, commanders would send 20 Zeros to overwhelm them. If photos showed 50 bombers, they'd allocate resources elsewhere. The Japanese were making decisions based on what they saw. Walker started studying the reconnaissance patterns. The Dyna's flight path was predictable, east to west, circling at a specific radius, optimal camera angle at 70 degrees off vertical. He calculated sight lines, shadow angles, and the resolution limits of aerial photography. From 28,000 feet, details smaller than 3 feet were invisible. Surface textures blurred. What mattered was shape and pattern. One evening, he walked the flight line with a camera borrowed from the photo reconnaissance unit. He took pictures from different angles, trying to match what the Japanese pilot would see. In the developed photos, the B-17s looked impressive. But when he compared a real bomber with a damaged one sitting at the end of the runway, engines removed, tail section partially dismantled, the difference was almost invisible from above. Shape, pattern, context. His pulse quickened. He spent the next week conducting experiments. He moved wrecked aircraft into revetments at night, photographed them from a borrowed L-4 observation plane, then compared the images to photos of operational bombers. Indistinguishable. Next test, he draped canvas over wooden frames in the rough shape of B-17's wings. More photographs. More comparison. Still indistinguishable. His hands shook as he laid out the final set of prints. The implications were staggering. "You don't need real bombers," he muttered. "You just need real shapes." But there was a problem. Building fake aircraft would require materials, labor, time, and worst of all, authorization. And no commanding officer in their right mind would approve a supply sergeant's cockamamie plan to build fake airplanes when real ones were desperately needed. He sat in his tent that night, listening to distant artillery thunder. Rain hammered the canvas roof. Somewhere out there, Japanese pilots were planning tomorrow's interception based on yesterday's reconnaissance photos. Walker made a decision. "If I don't do this, people die." He wasn't going to ask permission. August 8, 1943. 0200 hours. Walker and 3 enlisted men, 2 mechanics and a carpenter, worked by shielded flashlight in the salvage yard at the eastern edge of WWII. "This is insane," Corporal Eddie Davis whispered, cutting bamboo poles to precise lengths. "We're gonna get court-martialed." "Only if someone notices," Walker replied calmly, lashing poles together with salvaged wire. "And if this works, no one's going to ask questions." The plan was simple in theory, nightmarish in execution. Using damaged aircraft as templates, they were building full-scale decoys. Bamboo frames covered with painted canvas. Scrap metal shaped to suggest engine nacelles. Plywood wings. Everything designed to look convincing from 28,000 feet. The first prototype, which they were building tonight, would replicate B-17's silhouette. If successful, Walker planned to build a dozen more. Materials were borrowed from various supply dumps. Canvas from torn tents. Bamboo from native workers clearing jungle. Paint from maintenance supplies. Wire from communications reels. Nothing that would be immediately missed. Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, the carpenter, stepped back to assess their work. "The proportions are good. Wing-to-fuselage ratio looks right." He squinted. "But it's too clean. Real planes have weathering, panel lines, rivets." Walker nodded. He'd thought about that. "We'll add details tomorrow night. Paint streaks for exhaust stains. Dark patches for oil leaks. Shadows under the wings." "You're building a movie set," Davis said, understanding dawning. "This is all fake theater shit." "Exactly." Walker grinned in the darkness. "And the Japanese are the audience." They worked 4 hours that night, finishing the basic frame. The decoy was collapsed and hidden under camouflage netting near wrecked aircraft. To anyone walking past, it looked like more salvage. The next day, Walker requisitioned lumber for building duckboards. He ordered extra paint for facility maintenance. He borrowed tools from the motor pool for general repairs. No one questioned a supply sergeant managing supplies. Night 2, they added details. Mock gun positions. False cockpit windows made from painted plywood. Engine nacelles shaped from fuel drums. Night 3, the first decoy was complete. They moved it into an empty revetment under cover of darkness, positioning it next to two operational B-17s. Walker stood back, examining his work by moonlight. The fake bomber sat slightly crooked, one wingtip lower than the other, a detail that made it look more authentic, less perfectly aligned. From ground level, flaws were visible. Canvas sagged in places. The bamboo frame was obvious up close. But from above. "Cross your fingers," Walker muttered. "We'll know in 2 days." August 11th. The Dinah returned, right on schedule. Walker watched from his tent, heart pounding, as the distant reconnaissance plane circled at altitude. Cameras clicking. Recording. Counting. That night, he lay awake, staring at canvas ceiling, replaying every possible mistake. Wrong proportions. Shadows that didn't match. Paint that looked artificial. The intelligence report came through 3 days later, intercepted and translated Japanese radio traffic. American heavy bomber strength at WWII, 16 aircraft. Previously estimated at 13. Walker's decoy had been counted as real. He sat alone in the supply tent, the translated intercept in his hands, and allowed himself one quiet moment of vindication. Then he started building more. August 28, 1943. 1,420 hours. Captain Robert Hardluck Hansen brought his B-17, Lucky Strike, into final approach at WWII, fuel gauges reading empty, number 3 engine trailing smoke. The mission had been hell. 18 bombers sent to hit WWII airfield. Japanese fighters swarmed them 40 miles out, at least 30 Zeros, maybe more. The formation broke apart under the onslaught. Hansen's crew shot down 3 Zeros but took hits in both wings and the tail section. His bombardier was dead, slumped over the Norden bomb site, blood pooling on the deck. They'd completed the bomb run, barely, and turned for home with 6 other survivors. But something was wrong with the Japanese response. They'd been aggressive. Almost frantic. Zeros burning fuel at maximum rate, pressing attacks longer than usual, breaking off only when ammunition ran dry. "They thought there were more of us," Hansen's co-pilot had said during the flight back. "The way they scrambled, they expected a bigger formation." Now, taxiing to his revetment, Hansen counted aircraft on the ground. 23 B-17s visible from the taxiway. 4 on the flight line undergoing maintenance. The rest in revetments, ready or being serviced. He blinked, confused. "How many bombers do we have operational?" His co-pilot checked the mission board. 13 flew today. Maybe 6 more are mission ready. Count the planes outside. The co-pilot leaned forward, scanning the field. His face went pale. That's at least 23 birds." They shut down engines in silence. Hansen climbed out, boots hitting the tarmac, and walked toward the nearest revetment. A B-17 sat inside, looking pristine. Too pristine. No oil stains. No scorch marks from exhaust. The paint looked fresh. He approached slowly, then reached out and touched the fuselage. Canvas. Stretched over a wooden frame. "What the hell?" A voice behind him. "Sir, I can explain." Hansen turned to find a supply sergeant, Walker, according to his name tape, standing at attention but looking distinctly unapologetic. "You better make it good, Sergeant." Walker explained quickly. The reconnaissance flights. The counting. The decoys. The entire operation. Hansen listened, his expression unreadable. Around them, ground crews worked on real aircraft, oblivious to the conversation. "How many fake birds do you have?" 14 right now, sir. I'm building more." Hansen was silent for a long moment. Then, "The Zeros today, they came at us like we were a main force. Like we were a priority target." He looked at the decoy, then back at Walker. "They think we have more bombers than we do." "Yes, sir. And they're allocating fighters based on that assumption." "That's the theory, sir." Hansen walked a slow circle around the fake B-17. Up close, the illusion was obvious. From 200 feet. Completely convincing. How much time and material did this take? About 40 man-hours per decoy. Mostly scrap and salvage. And you did this without authorization. Walker said nothing. Court-martial charges were forming in real time. Hansen looked at him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. I lost 8 crew members today, Sergeant. Good men. They died because we're spread too thin, flying undermanned missions against superior numbers. He paused. If the Japanese intelligence thinks we have 40 bombers instead of 20, they make different decisions. They split their fighter coverage. They hold back reserves. Another pause. You didn't build decoys, Sergeant. You built a psychological weapon. Walker exhaled, hardly daring to hope. Hansen turned to face him directly. I'm not going to court-martial you. I'm going to give you a promotion and every resource you need. His voice hardened. Because you're going to build me 50 more of these ghosts. And we're going to convince the Japanese that the 5th Air Force is 3 times larger than it actually is. Walker saluted, unable to speak. Let's find out if we can win a war with fake airplanes, Sergeant. By October 1943, Walker's Ghost Squadron had expanded to 73 decoy aircraft spread across 6 airfields in New Guinea and the Solomons. The results were measurable and devastating. Japanese fighter interception rates dropped 31% over a 3-month period. Imperial Navy commanders, believing they faced overwhelming American bomber strength, began holding back elite fighter units for priority targets that were often decoys. Real American bomber losses decreased from 4.6% per mission to 2.1% per mission between September and December 1943. The psychological impact was worse. Japanese pilots reported encountering ghost bombers, aircraft they'd engaged and believed destroyed that reappeared in subsequent missions. Morale declined. Combat reports became unreliable, filled with exaggerated kill claims and confusion. By November, Imperial headquarters in Tokyo was convinced American heavy bomber production had doubled. They reallocated resources accordingly, pulling fighters from other theaters to counter a threat that existed primarily in photographs and statistical reports. The Ghost Squadron's greatest triumph came on December 2, 1943. A Japanese strike force, 14 bombers escorted by 27 Zeros, attacked what they believed to be a forward staging area with 30 American heavy bombers. They destroyed 11 B-17s on the ground in a devastating raid. 9 of those 11 were Walker's decoys. The 2 real bombers, already damaged and awaiting repair, were acceptably losses. The Japanese expended massive resources destroying balsa wood and canvas. But vindication came with complications. In early January 1944, Walker was summoned to 5th Air Force Headquarters in Brisbane, Australia. He expected a commendation ceremony, maybe a promotion. Instead, he met with 2 colonels and a civilian intelligence officer in a windowless briefing room. Sergeant Walker, the senior colonel began, your work has been effective. Perhaps too effective. Walker said nothing. The problem is verification. We've intercepted Japanese communications describing engagement with American bomber formations that don't exist. They're shooting at ghosts, reporting victories against non-existent squadrons. The colonel leaned forward. They've stopped trusting their own intelligence. The civilian spoke, which means they're becoming unpredictable, making erratic decisions. That's dangerous. I don't understand, sir. Your decoys convinced the Japanese we had overwhelming force. Now they're desperate. Desperate enemies make desperate decisions, bonsai charges, kamikaze tactics, scorched earth policies. The civilian's voice was cold. You've created a strategic deception so successful that it's destabilizing enemy command structures. Walker felt a chill. Are you telling me to stop? No, the colonel said. We're telling you to expand operations, but under direct intelligence control. Your Ghost Squadron is being reclassified as a strategic deception unit. You'll work directly with OSS and Allied intelligence. They promoted him to lieutenant on the spot, gave him a budget, a staff, and operational security clearance. The theater director from Burbank was now running one of the war's most classified programs. That night, alone in his new quarters, Walker thought about the bomber crews he'd met. The pilots who'd thanked him. The gunners who'd bought him drinks. They knew the truth. The decoys were saving lives. But the brass wanted control. Wanted to weaponize illusion. Walker understood. War wasn't just about dropping bombs. It was about making your enemy believe lies so compelling they'd destroy themselves trying to counter them. He'd created ghosts. Now he had to teach them to fight. The Ghost Squadron operated until August 1945, eventually expanding to include fake tanks, artillery positions, and even entire airfields populated exclusively by decoys. Estimates suggest Walker's deception program indirectly saved between 400 to 600 American aircrew lives by reducing effective Japanese interception rates throughout the Pacific Theater. After the war, he returned to Hollywood, worked on a dozen forgettable westerns, and died quietly in 1987. No headlines. No documentaries. The Ghost Squadron remained classified until 1993. Today, military historians recognize Walker's work as pioneering the field of strategic visual deception, techniques now standard in modern warfare, from inflatable tanks to radar decoys to digital camouflage. But the real lesson wasn't about fooling cameras or confusing enemy analysts. It was about understanding that wars are fought in two places simultaneously, on the battlefield and in the minds of those counting the cost. Walker understood something profound. Perception shapes reality. If your enemy believes you're strong, they act defensively. If they believe you're weak, they press the attack. The truth doesn't matter, only what they think is true. He fought the Pacific War not with bombs or bullets, but with bamboo, canvas, and paint. And he proved that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't the one that destroys, it's the one that makes your enemy destroy themselves. On a hillside overlooking Burbank, there's a small veterans memorial. Walker's name is carved there, one among thousands, with a simple inscription. Sergeant John Walker, 43rd Bombardment Group, 1943 to 1945. No mention of ghosts. No mention of the deception that changed everything. But every November, someone, no one knows who, leaves a single prop from a theater production at the base of the memorial. A painted wooden aircraft propeller. Fake, but effective.